Thank you very much for inviting me here. This is a wonderful conference, and I really like the title of it, a conference about European painting, because it saves me many disclaimers and apologies about my inability to speak about any kind of painting outside of the Western tradition. Maybe I can speak a little bit about cave paintings, but I am reluctant that I actually have a good enough perspective to understand that. As you know, I'm here to speak about painting in the light of recent experiments in artificial intelligence, or more precisely to speak about artificially intelligent painting. That is, painting produced by different types of computer processing techniques. Artificial intelligence is used here as a generic name to refer to any type of computer programming that functions around algorithms that accumulate and process a huge amount of data and has the ability to arrive at certain conclusions about this data. I am aware this is not an accurate definition, and those that are more acquainted with the field will ask to differentiate between AI, machine learning, language processing, etc. So for the sake of general knowledge, I have prepared a short list of the terms that are used today to describe those different types of technologies. But for this presentation, I'm really less interested in the analysis of these technologies, the difference between them, and what they can do. I honestly think it's quite boring. I am more interested in the claims their creators make in relation to grand themes, such as art, intelligence, and creativity. And I hope to think together with you how, as artists, art historians, and art theoreticians, can we respond to these developments. But before all else, I would like to start this presentation with a personal note. About 6 months ago, I came here to Porto to visit Professor Francisco Laranjo. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly. We met in London on a different occasion. I came to Lisbon to give a paper in another conference, and I thought it would be a really nice opportunity to catch up with him. He kindly greeted me as I arrived here to Porto's train station and took me to a stroll around the center of the city, which ended in his studio. Now, I should be honest, it has been a very long time since I have encountered an actual painting. You see, I once was an artist myself, a painter, a sculptor, performance artist, printmaker. But I used to love painting. I can even say I used to lust painting. I didn't think I would ever be able to live without it. Something about the smell, the texture, the taste, and the warmth of paint as I arranged it carefully on my palette, the smooth sensation of the brush vibrating the texture of the canvas as I gently caressed it, a movement that seemed to direct itself somehow, the intimacy in this parallel between me, my body, and the plane of the canvas was like a mirror, an extension, a clone of myself in color. And when I say myself, I don't mean my face, or my body, or my thoughts or my emotions. Just me as a vibration, as an invisible material, maybe as a current, or as bare life. I know there are many painters sitting here in the audience today, so I'm a little bit comforted that maybe you know what I'm talking about. Painting as a medium, there is really something about it. Many years have passed since I indulged myself in painting. I guess I did not see myself as a brilliant artist. I didn't believe I could make a living out of it, and in any case, I didn't want my arts to sort of be mixed in the politics of time and money, so I chose a different path. I promised I would keep on painting no matter what, and I kept my promise for a while. And to this day, I still crave sitting next to an easel, but I seldom do. I can trace the exact moment when I stopped. It was about 10 years ago. I came to London to look at a painting of Caravaggio, which I adored. It is presented at the National Gallery. During my BA, when I was an art student, I used to come and visit this painting periodically. Just sit and stare. And my eyes would just fill with tears, and I would gasp as looking at it. With the memory of my beloved painting in my mind, I went to look for it in the halls of the National Gallery, And here it was, exactly where I have left it 7 or 8 years before. Beautiful, yes, but nothing. I felt absolutely nothing. Desperate, I rushed forward through different holes, looking for a substitute for my love, but nothing touched me. No painting touched me. And for a while, I couldn't look at any paintings. It was a medium that deeply disappointed me. I had what I would then define as a general crisis with art. A bit of a problem for someone who is a curator and just starting her academic journey in the exact same field. And to be honest, I can just put my finger on it, what made me lose my trust and interest in art altogether. I'm still trying to figure it out. This paper, in fact, is part of this attempt. So how did I get there? Oh yeah, right. Visit in Porto in November, I have to remind myself. When I entered Francisco's studio, there was a strange feeling of familiarity. It was like entering a flat that was once yours, that you have left a while back, but still retained some of your smell, let's say, or what you thought was your own smell when you suddenly realized that it was the flat smell that stuck to your own body and not the other way around. Something came back to me. Maybe it was the newspapers on the floor, random objects collected for curious reasons, stashes of papers and books, the smell of paint. But I think it was also something about the quality of the painting. There was something almost beyond human about it, brush strokes that could traverse a whole room, yet they felt like they were flowing like river, like water, effortlessly. There was something non-human about them, almost lifelike. I looked closely at the gestures, and I couldn't trace their starting point or their end, just feeling that the paint is fully free and fully controlled, exactly at the same time. And this fascinated me and touched me, and I could almost remember something that I have forgotten long ago. We had a lovely conversation, Francisco and I found myself revisiting the notion of painting again, its essence, beyond abstraction and beyond concept. Just the painting as an extension of one's sense of life, of movement, of wonder. A means of exploring the world through walking within it blind, with bare hands. A little bit later, one of my MA students in a course I teach at the University of Haifa called Art in the Digital Age was struggling to choose her case study for a course's final dissertation. She came to me with her new discovery of artificially engineered painting based on artificial intelligence processing. One example was a group of art historians, conservators, and engineers that claimed to have created an original new portrait by Rembrandt. If you don't mind, I would like us to dedicate 5 minutes to a video exploring the process behind this project because it may assist those of us who are not totally acquainted with artificial intelligence and machine learning yet to understand how this whole thing works. And to be honest, the process is quite similar in different applications of artificial intelligence in relation to art. And this would become relevant for later examples that I bring. So, for any of you trained with critical thinking about art, this is obviously a very problematic project. And I'll try to explain a little bit more about it. But at least I hope that you understand the process of how to create a painting through artificial intelligence. Now here, even from the definition of what the project does, many problems arise. But if we want to understand this in terms of painting as a medium, it's clear all artificial intelligence did in this case was to learn the mannerisms, the external expression of Rembrandt's movement on the canvas, their statistical analysis and their reproduction to create, so to speak, a new portrait. So what we are dealing here essentially is simply the purification of those external gestures, but without the body whose habits they represent. It's a strange thing indeed. Empty mannerism, maybe mannerism in its purest. For me, the main question here was, what does this have to do with painting at all? But then my student brought some few other examples, and they started me thinking, and I would like to share some of those with you. Now, before I continue with my story, I would like us to take a moment to digest these works and really absorb them by just looking at them. And maybe if you want to share some of the responses that you have about those artificially intelligent created paintings. Anyone wants to try? No? I'm all alone trying to speak about those? Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit more. The first example is actually by Ahmed El-Gamel, an engineer and art enthusiast, and his AI friend called Akan. And I say friend because El-Gamel himself refers to his algorithm as a collaborator, creative collaborator. And I quote from his statement. Modeled from psychological theories of the brain's response to aesthetics, Akan is a complex algorithm that draws from art historical knowledge and gets a mandate to create something new, enabling him to make new works without human intervention. What El-Gamel did is far too complex for this 20-second presentation of his ideas, but you can learn more about him and his work in his TEDx talk. But one of the processes he describes in this talk is a systematic comparison of painting of same periods of time, calculating the differences and similarities between works that are regarded as traditional and works that are regarded as embodying some kind of novelty. And for El-Gamel, this is the expression of creativity. And this knowledge is what gave his algorithm the option to create new artworks. So unlike the Rembrandt projects, these are artworks completely created by the algorithm, not according to any facial recognition. The next example, which you've seen, is obvious. And I quote from their statement as well. Just a second, here it is. One of our goals is to explain and democratize these advances through our artworks. The project that we are working on today began a year ago with the discovery of generative adversarial networks, or GANs, which are machine learning algorithms that generate images. This technology allows us to experiment with the notion of creativity for a machine. I really am not sure if this is a startup company or really a collective of artists. It's very hard to tell. After all, this painting that you see of Comte Bellamy, the painting that you saw before anyway, sold for no less than $430,000 in Christie's auction house. So also gained the acknowledgement of the artistic institution, or at least begins to accept or be acknowledged by the artistic institution, which leads us to another problem. So Obvious ran same processes to their AI algorithm as El-Gamel and as the next Rembrandt, but also they geared them with special face recognition mechanisms so that the portraits would actually look like portraits. The last example that you saw is from, sorry, I'm a little bit ahead of myself. The last example that you saw was from artist Robbie Barrett, and we'll get back to him a little bit later. In the end, my student chose to do her presentation on another digital artwork. She shared with me that she doesn't feel she has the tools and the right vocabulary to understand and analyze this work, despite our numerous conversations about them. You see, she's a painter, and this work was so removed for her from the experience of art that she knew. Yet, she could not fully deny that the work had something in it that it is different to other examples of computer-generated art. To give you a bit of background, when we speak about the roots of AI and art, we have to go back to the very early experiments with art and computing. So as early as the 1960s and 70s, traditionally trained artists looked to understand how new computer technologies could correspond with art and how computers could be used as a medium. Such artists often conducted visual research in collaboration with scientists, forming research groups, and it would be nice to note also that while doing so, they contributed extensively to image processing techniques and technologies and to the visual aspects of digital world that we know it today, as we know it today. Examples include New Tendency movement in Zagreb, GRAV, or Groupe de Recherche d'Art Visual, co-founded by Vera Molnar, which you can see here. Experiments in Art and Technology, or EAT, which saw the collaboration of artists such as Robert Rauschenberg and engineers from Bell Laboratories, and the Stuttgart Schools that was founded around Max Benz, a philosopher and semiotician who attempted to develop a scientific approach in the realm of aesthetics. His main purpose was to construct a theoretical platform that would enable a rational evaluation and creation of artworks, as opposed to traditional theories oriented to subjective and emotional interpretation. The most influential area of Benz's theories is the concept of generative aesthetics. One of the most influential artists to follow up Benz's suggestions was Manfred Mohr. In her article, Algorithmic Art and Its Historical Relationships, Anya, this is Manfred Mohr, sorry, as I said, I'm not completely in sync with myself. So in her article, Algorithmic Art and Its Art Historical Relationship, Anna Dodrich offers an extensive analysis of the relationship between the art movements of the time, 60s and 70s, and Mohr's project. In her words, in the late 1960s, Mohr started exploring computer algorithms for the creation of his computer-generated works based on Benz's scientific aesthetics. The geometric form of a cube is the primary motive of Mohr's computer-based works since then. Mohr introduced the cube in his works as its structure is based on a mathematical logic and therefore can be well adapted to a computable configuration. Using the cube as his primary motive, Mohr created a series of computer-generated works. His black and white plotter drawing belongs to his early work phase cubic limit. Nonetheless, Mohr never aimed to visualize mathematical properties of the cube. Instead, his research is rather focused on the exploration of new visual and aesthetic expressions that result from abstract relations between structural elements in the cube. And the work indeed does what it said it would do in its title. It explores the limits of a cube, the possible abstraction of its form, using mathematical equations that spontaneously generate all possible configurations of a cube. And maybe this sounds a little bit familiar? I'm not sure. The thing is, Mohr was interested in form, in aesthetic, and in expression, but his works were not exactly regarded as painting. Firstly, because they were prints, not paintings, but also because they gave birth to a new form of art, if you like, what we now refer to as generative art. So that's the definition of generative art. Generative art hence became a general title to depict art that used computers as means of producing forms following algorithms. Or, to put it simply, algorithms are simply instructions. It is an art form that has its own logic, histories, and sensitivities, and it's derived from instruction-based conceptual art and constructivist art and language explorations. And maybe a good way to approach these AI projects that we've seen before. I mean, it's from the same tradition. Inke Arns, a theoretician of generative art and its different types, notes in his article, and I just love the name of this article, so I prepared a slide especially for it. Read me, run me, execute me. Software and its discontents, or it's the performativity of code. Stupid. Anyway, Arns explained that under the umbrella of generative art exists two main approaches, one that looks at software as a means of creating forms, which he terms software formalism, and one that looks at algorithm and software as a cultural text, which he terms software culturalism. It would be easy enough to dismiss the works of Obvious, El Gamal, and the next Rembrandt as simply a sophisticated case of software formalism. Generative art, however, as we could see in previous examples, stems from an approach to art as a system or as a process, and not as a product or an object. In either of those approaches to generative art, the artwork is not only the aesthetic output, but the whole of the process that led to it, and the different results that one could expect in the future. One example that may illustrate what I mean is the seminal work by John F. Simon Jr., Every Icon. I don't know if you are acquainted with it. Every Icon was produced in 1997 and incorporates duration in a way that, while resolved conceptually, it is unsolvable in practice. So this is Every Icon. It is not showing. I don't know how to do it. You can look at here. Okay. It's the same square, but it's just twinkling like that. So, as I said, every icon consists of a 32 by 32 grid of varying black and white elements. The grid's elements change as the software progresses from a completely white grid at the start to eventually show every possible combination of black and white grid elements. Now, you saw the program is still running. However, this outcome, that actually the artwork will achieve its goal, is very unlikely since the second line alone, the second of the 32 lines, is estimated to take 5.85 billion years to complete. I don't know if we'll stay here until then, I'm not quite sure. It is a software approach to image production that refers to and develops the premise of Manfred Moore and Lewitt even further. This example demonstrates that at the core of generative art, whether it has participatory and interactive elements in it or not, is the conceptual basis that stems from an understanding of art in the realm of the dematerialization of the art object, as Lippert would refer to it. An art that looks at the condition of its production and offers a critique of those. It follows the logic of Kossuth's experiments with art and language and Hack's experiments with real-time systems. And if we look at this stream of art's history as art as a process and its use of media, we may recall that some of the main concerns of the avant-garde and critical art movement since the 1960s in general was to go beyond the formalist consideration and to explore the grounds of creation that is found in the concept or the process through which art is produced. This approach completely empties this pure software formalism we talked about from its meaning in this context, as these projects only address the aesthetic pleasure of generating forms and do not have a meaning beyond that, as you would expect from a contemporary art project. I will not tire you with a whole system of arguments we could make in relation to the work's interpretation as software culturalism. I will just mention that software culturalism looks at software as poetry, and in that emphasizes the presence of code in various ways, many times in relation to user interaction. In the works we have seen so far, we cannot speak of a critical approach to the algorithm as an actual text. At best, obvious signed their creation with the algorithm instead of their name. Okay? So I kind of understood why my student felt overwhelmed by the questions such advances in technology asks us to deal with. Students are practical creatures, they need to submit essays on time, and they don't have the time and the space to fully think about those things, let alone invent a language to deal with them, and I truly wish they had more time to do that. We looked together at other examples of generative art as a means of contextualizing the work and tried to analyze it. I didn't take the next Rembrandt project too seriously. From the point of view of art's history, it was clear to me that this creation was devoid of meaning, not because it was not impressive, it's very impressive, but the very trajectory of creating a fake original of a dead artist seemed a little ludicrous to me. I mean, as an art scholar, I know that originals are defined not by their ability to imitate the style of a painter, right? If that's the case, well, the term forgery would not have been invented. In the meanwhile, every morning I look at my phone and I look at news, and I got a constant stream, almost every morning, of all kinds of examples of how AI does all kinds of creative things, from running conversation and imitating human sense of humor. If some of you are acquainted with Sophia, she went viral a few months ago, to Carl Sims' experiments with evolutionary theory and AI's ability to assist us in optimizing and designing better machines and robots, so technology that actually designs itself according to evolutionary concepts, to algorithms that run like medical textbooks and are able to diagnose disease with an unprecedented accuracy, to algorithms that run our whole economic system. In parallel, there is like a hype around AI and creativity, and it seems every day someone invents an algorithm that can draw, paint, sketch, tell jokes, write novels. Most of the novels on Amazon, by the way, are written by AI algorithms, offer us service, and just such a flow of products. And in this rhythm, it kind of stretched me a little, you know? I realized, as Hannah Arendt has once said, in times of crisis, it is easier to act than to think. So I thought to myself, think. just a little bit more about these intelligent automated systems. We all speak of artificial intelligence in relation to human intelligence. And all tech enthusiasts, which is every second blogger in our very strange time, predict a doomsday when artificial intelligence will override human intelligence and the world will be ruled by machines. Familiar? I have no idea how long this myth has been around, but in my tradition, the Jewish tradition, it exists at least since the Middle Ages in the figure of the golem, a creature artificially fabricated by a certain rabbi who, with the power of digits and letters, had infused it with life. Until today, there are some horror stories being told in certain streets of Prague about the mess this creature had brought and the difficulty in managing it. Of course, the golem is maybe a coarser or maybe more masculine version of Galathea and Pygmalion, isn't it? So the question of artificial intelligence is not exactly new, even not the question of the relationship between artificial intelligence and art. In approaching this topic, I always go back to basics. There is something about new technologies that hypnotize us. So to shake us up from the hypnosis of buzzwords, let's think about their meaning first. Intelligence. Do we even know what it is? Do we really know what it is? At the moment, artificial intelligence is not based on philosophical questions like that. No one asks what intelligence is, but everybody creates intelligent systems. In the eyes of computer engineers, the first aspect of intelligence is the ability to understand and speak a language, natural language, human language. And indeed, many of the early experiments with AI were in relation to the ability to recognize and process natural language constructs, so that now we can simply ask Google a question, right? And we can interact with virtual service providers as well, and also with chatbots. This is a very narrow aspect of intelligence, and even with all the progress, chatting with bots is annoying and doesn't feel human at all, let alone intelligent. Do you think? And even if they did speak, those machines, is that really a mastery of what matters in human intelligence? And especially when it comes to art, it's not really about the mannerisms of a certain artist, isn't it? It's about the creative force that's behind the work that matters. A question of creativity is an integral and major component of intelligence. In this, it is easy to dismiss artificial intelligence as a term, looking at it from a cyber-feminist perspective. Those seemingly objective systems are designed and run from a very biased perspective, as we could see in the Rembrandt film, the perspective of engineers who are most likely male and whose education did not include any form of critical thinking about art. They create algorithms based on ancient belief systems that run through the blood of humanity and just can't be shaken off. Catherine Hales, in her seminal text, The Condition of Virtuality, would demonstrate with her detailed and rigorous literary critique that all those attempts to create artificial intelligence, artificial life, to store memory, to copy and clone oneself into digital consciousness, all those myths our culture loves so much actually derive from a very narrow understanding of life itself. The belief that information is separate from the medium in which it is transferred, that our consciousness, intelligence, and life can be separated from our bodies, preserved and resurrected as needed through a different medium. This belief runs so deep in our cultural systems of representation that we take it for granted. We never ask ourselves, how close is this to the religious story of life after death, to the seemingly secular story of a consciousness preserved in a jar? But then I realize that it is what those AR projects are meant to do, only that it seems that they are potent exactly when they disengage with the notion of human intelligence and start to look at other models of intelligence that do not belong to humans. So I brought you some more examples to explain what I mean. And it would be a good opportunity to go back to Robbie Barrett, because here is what he states about his work. Using an implementation of progressive drawing of guns and a corpus of thousands of nude portraits scraped primarily from wiki art, a neural network was trained to create nude portraits. The resulting portraits are not realistic. The machine failed to learn all the proper attributes found in nude portraits and instead has fallen into a local minima where it generates real blobs of flesh. Is this how machines see humans, see people? In this sense, Barrett is not interested in imitating human vision, but he is interested in understanding what machine vision actually is and how we could translate this non-visual vision into visual means. Same goes for artist Tom White, who teaches computer programs to recognize objects and attempt creating representations of those objects in color and line. In his words, an architecture called perception engines is introduced that is able to construct representational physical object and is powered primarily by computational perception. An initial implementation was used to create several ink prints based on ImageNet categories, and permutations of this technique are the basis of ongoing work. In those little machine prints, oh, again, I'm ahead of myself. Yeah, those little machine prints. Indeed, those little machine prints are very compelling if you think about them from the perspective of a new species, learning how to communicate with humans in visual terms. From such a perspective, their expressive quality are so easy to digest. I personally immediately fell in love with those childlike quests for understanding a cabbage. It is almost like me trying to draw still life when I was 8 or 9. And this skill to see objects and be able to translate them into two-dimensional representation is indeed a skill that one has to acquire, both in terms of technical painting or drawing skills, but more so, drawing and painting is a way of seeing, isn't it? From this perspective, it is quite easy to continue and develop a theory and interpretation of these paintings from a cyber-feminist perspective. Donna Haraway is maybe the first to point to the birth of a new type of subjectivity that needs to be explored in the context of artificial intelligence. For her, the ultimate combination of man and machine should be regarded from the point of view of identity. She contemplates the subjectivity of a new species whose identity constructs have nothing to do with sexuality, mortality, morality, with the organic material as we understand it. If this new species had an art, what would it look like? Indeed, we could read those artworks from this point of view, trying to understand what this new subjectivity is, whether it has an ability for expression. Is it possible that we are encountering a new form of life, a new way of processing the emotional nuances of humans? It is indeed a fascinating viewpoint, one that renders those works with a mystery of an other. However, what does it say about painting? I remind you that this is the subject of this conference, right? We're talking about painting, not about the creation of new life forms, are we? Which brings me to my last example. Patrick Tressett, who created a bunch of robots named Paul and taught them how to draw from looking at people. Tressett's work are not about the algorithm and not about the drawing. They are about a loss that Tressett wanted to deal with. In a very short interview between Tressett and in this film, I don't think that we have enough time to see it, so I'm just going to skip it. I'm just going to tell you a little bit. For Tressett, his own inability to return to drawing or to painting made him go back to his earlier career and experience as a computer engineer to see how he could investigate this issue from a different perspective, attempting to understand what drawing was in the first place. And this had, of course, resonated with my own story, because I remind you, I also lost that ability to paint. And I never told you the reason why I stopped painting or making art. Well, I stopped making art when I realized, after a long process of inner research, that the ultimate masterpiece I was intimately striving for was an artwork that would be alive in itself. I guess it was a Pygmalion journey after all. And when I looked around me at the magnificent creation, the beautiful intricacy of forms and the way they correspond and communicate effortlessly, fluently, curating not only one life form, but sustaining each other as life, I realized my passion was a lost passion, and maybe even wrong. So I stopped. I decided to just observe. Really look at the beauty of the living that already exists. Take the place of the observer, like artists that swear by chance operations in their work. Life became my art. But maybe in that realization, I simply missed the point, because you see, those works that experiment with painting just prove that painting is the ultimate medium for art, and it does so once more. It is the first medium that one tries to imitate when inventing new technologies, isn't it? And it is the first one to be declared dead. But why? Maybe because the inherent relationship between painting and transcendence, that experience of a life without a body. Whether we observe and create painting to understand the human condition, or we use it to understand the cyborg condition, the medium of painting doesn't change. Just the subject, or the lack of a subject, that is creating it. It is through these AI experiments that we can truly start to intuitively and emotionally understand machines. And this is to testify about painting, not about artificial intelligence. And as humans, I don't think we will ever stop being curious about our own nature. That's another dress at work. As Kandinsky would have put it, in all that we have discussed above lie hidden the seeds of the struggle towards the non-naturalistic, the abstract, towards inner nature. Consciously or unconsciously, they obey the words of Socrates, know thyself. Consciously or unconsciously, artists turn gradually towards an emphasis of their materials, examining them spiritually, weighing in the balance the inner worth of those elements out of which their art is best suited to create. I have come to the end of my talk, which of course did not answer most of the fundamental questions that we have started with. What is intelligence? What does it have to do with technology? What is the relationship between technology and creativity? What is creativity? What is sensitivity? Can we define them mathematically? What's beyond the sensual realm? How to represent that which is beyond representation? How to embody into our creation the power of life? What is the power of life? Can we reach it? Can we touch it with our brushes? These are still questions that need to be answered, and I don't think finding the answers is our goal here. I think this journey towards the subject that we are, that undefinable bare life, is an unending one by definition. And what a better way to research and search for it than in painting. Thank you very much.